coming to UFP, I had a very clear goal, which is to make a very swift transition into policy and practice-based research. And I think that the biggest take back that I have is a set of vocabulary and ideas that would actually work on ground, that are not just taken from theory, but more importantly, I think building a series of networks to see where this work is happening, what communities are getting affected, and I think that has been my biggest takeaway. I think the biggest thing is that we have lawyers and sociologists and architects, economists sort of sitting on the same issue. So every time we have a big presentation coming up, there's always someone I can take help from to understand how to read documents that come from government officials, from certain specific departments. I think it's also helped me figure out what kind of resources I can reach out to. But most importantly, I think having a diverse class makes you feel like there's space for everyone to talk about things, even if it may not be the most popular sort of opinion. And I think that it also forces you to become more accepting of people and places you're not familiar with, which also I think helps you professionally later because you will be in workspaces that will have a variety of people who come from very different backgrounds. So, how do you sort of find a common ground to find solutions, to have discussions? I think I have learned the most from my fellows, and to think of how law defines things, to think of how maps can be used, to think of how the same words can mean different things in different disciplines. And I think that has been the most fruitful thing for me. I think when you study one discipline for a very long time, you get confined in the kind of approach it takes in terms of addressing, in terms of the language that they use, in terms of the theories that they back on. So when you come into a place and it kind of gets challenged and pushed back, I come from a sociology background, so a lot of it has to do with social stratification, how our community is experiencing different things. But when you sit in a planning class, I've never once been asked before, how does a master plan sort of affect the experiences of these communities? So I think what it does is it kind of complicates the idea of what the urban is, and it forces you to think about how can we find a more fuller, wider, broader understanding of the urban, thinking of multiple stakeholders. I think it also, like I said before, it equips you with language that allows other people to take you more seriously on ground, because it makes you more aware of what kind of challenges are actually happening as opposed to certain notions that you've been carrying because of your discipline. It also forces you to think about whether a more design approach would be more appropriate. Is it more appropriate to write a paper on this issue? So I think most of all, it challenges you to say, get out of your comfort zone and sort of think of what kind of alternatives exist for this issue. The thing about skill labs is that because I come from a sociology background, a lot of times you're told that you won't be able to handle data. So even though sociology is very oriented towards social phenomena, we never study data, we never study budgets, we never study how do we look at mapping, for example, to study the things or to find representation of the theory that we're studying. So I think what it kind of destabilized that idea, and we were all forced to pick up basic data analysis skills, which I think it constantly surprised me every time I was able to finish a map or analyze a set of census data or find different representations of it. So I think what it does, it kind of empowers you to think that it's achievable, you can do it, and you can actually also take it one step forward and enhance it further. It was very exciting to be put in a strange place where most of us don't speak the language, and to say that there's a multitude of stories. You go and pick the one that speaks the most to you, and then you flesh it out. And I think that was really interesting because there were no foundations on what kind of work do you have to do, what kind of output. We were able to experiment, play around. We were able to say, how can I study this same thing? How can I get a sense of memories of a space while also looking at official documents? So I think that Practica, my favorite part was that you kind of let the space speak to you and say, this is the story, and you find an angle to it. And the more you go in, the more stories you find. And I think it also equips you to say that a lot of times when you do on ground work, you don't have as much support. You don't always have someone to ask questions to. You kind of have to go on ground and figure it out. And it is a very challenging, rigorous process, but at the end of it, it feels it's very rewarding. I think Integrative Case Week, it was a mix of a bunch of methods. We were asked to be on ground, visit different parts of the city where very specific activities were happening. We went to dry waste collection centers. We spoke to workers there. We spoke to managers there, operators there. But I think it's a little bit different from Practica because you get a theme to work around, and you have to see how all of these experiences are coming together for you to build an awareness of what is happening. So our theme was about what do settlements mean? How do we define something that is very broad, that can change the minute you change the person who's defining it? And how do we inculcate theory, data, experiences to create, theory from ground? It's a very rigorous program, so you're constantly on your toes. You're constantly either on field or in class or doing a skill lab. But I think it's these moments right after you have presented something, you get feedback that's detailed, that's constructive, that's kind of suggestive of where you can go ahead. I think that's when the joy kind of seeps in of what you have done. And I think another thing that I really like about the fellowship is that I've been able to build very strong relations with not only my fellows, but also with faculty members, with people who are working in different capacities within the organization. Urban Lens was something that I had heard and talked about before coming to the fellowship. So it was very exciting that I could be a part of it as a volunteer, that I had the opportunity to talk to filmmakers, to see how they approach the urban from literally a lens. So I think that was also a very exciting part. I think what the office hours allow you to do is sort of dig deeper into what it is that you're aiming to get at through the fellowship. And I think that it helps to talk to people that are working on ground, that are working on ongoing projects, to understand where your career trajectory can go. But I think more importantly, it's also a very freeing space to confide in your faculty, to talk about any issues you might be facing. I think of it as a little breather in the middle. And I think office is a little bit different from tutorials because, at least in my college, tutorials were a group thing. So you would go in smaller groups and it was mostly assignment driven. So you would get feedback on writing, you would get feedback on, I think, the kind of project work that you're doing, but it was very academically oriented. But I think officers here are very flexible in terms of what they can be. It also gives you space to become familiar with people and yeah. I think it's a very interesting experience when you get to see your fellows not just in a professional, collaborative capacity, but also as individuals leading their lives outside. I think it kind of pushes you to think about where they're coming from, why they have a certain take on things, why is their approach very specific. But most importantly, I think it's very interesting to watch them grow to see them being challenged, how they respond to things, to see what scenarios they shine in, and what are the scenarios where they, ask for help. I think it's a very intimate experience. Living with 40 people, it's like being in a joint family. I think it's good to um, have an opportunity to interact with people that may be working on different scales, that may be working at a more policy level, beyond community-driven work. These are people who are running their own organizations, people who are kind of approaching urban issues through many different lenses. I think for me, it kind of helped me see what are the possibilities, where all can I use these skills, and what places I could end up in. I think it also gives you an idea of the broad range of work and actors who are involved in this kind of work. And I think there's a lot of space for you to approach them after the masterclass, to build contacts, to ask them any questions you have specific to that sector. And I think that's always very interesting, because a lot of times, because our number is a little bit smaller, we get to talk to them directly, we get to ask questions. There's a lot of opportunity for communication, essentially. I hope to get involved in housing or public transport. I think those are very interesting sectors that have a lot of convergence with a lot of the things we have studied in terms of planning, governance, infrastructure, identity. And I hope to be in a practice-based research firm where I'm able to stay connected with the field and the community, but I'm also working towards providing solutions that work on that level.